I've used him. I've used QSBS 5 times in my career and saved millions of dollars in taxes. I pay zero on 10 million. And so since that time, so really since the fall of 2015, the QSBS benefits have really multiplied. This is a tremendous benefit for people who are investors or early employees of technology businesses, high growth businesses. If you are in the situation where you've got a high growth tech business, you're involved in the early stages, you absolutely owe it to yourself to learn more. This is Christopher Karachale, one of the most prominent experts on QSBS in the country. I've used him. I have used QSBS 5 times in my career and saved millions of dollars in taxes. And most of those I've worked with Christopher. Let's start out. And I'll ask you the first question, Christopher. Is it a personal question? First question is, what are the benefits of QSBS?
Yeah, well, you did a really good job. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to spend time with you. So a little about me. I'm a tax attorney based in San Francisco, and I work with founders and early employees and venture capitalists, many people on this street, helping to identify whether their investments qualify for the QSBS benefits that Bill described. And in general, Bill laid out the rules. So the QSBS has been in the code since 1992. It only really became important in 2010. At that point, Congress increased the benefit to 100%. So when Bill said you can exclude all the gain, until 2010, the requirement was you had a 50% exclusion or a 75% exclusion. Starting in 2010, Congress said if you invest in domestic C corporations, right, so LLCs and S corporations don't count, if you invest in domestic C corporations, which most startups are, and you hold those shares for 5 years, and you got those shares when the company had less than $50 million of aggregate gross assets, and the companies meet various requirements, they're not service-based industries, but more like technology companies, then at that time, the rule said you could exclude the greater of 10 million or 10 times your basis. So California, we talked about California. In 2012, California used to have conforming rules for QSBS, and there were benefits. In 2012, California threw those rules out. There was a court case where the rules were construed as unconstitutional. I had been publishing and writing about this, and then in 2015, so remember, the rule said in September 2010, if you got those shares and held for 5 years, you'd get the 100% benefit. So in the fall of 2015, it started here in Silicon Valley, actually, right? People in New York didn't realize this until 2018, 19. People started saying, oh, wait a second. I own shares of a startup. It's a domestic C corporation. I got it under 50 million. It's a qualified trader business. I pay zero on 10 million. And so since that time, so really since the fall of 2015, the QSBS benefits have really multiplied, or rather the individuals, the taxpayers who get the benefits have really increased. For a long time, I think there was a lot of confusion. And the statute, Section 1202 of the Revenue Code, which describes QSBS, is written in an, at best, imperfect, and at worst, just overtly wrong way, right? So for example—
How unusual.
Right. So for example, in order to get QSBS benefits, among the various requirements, the company needs to be a qualified trader business. And Congress, in its infinite wisdom, said, we're only going to tell you what's not a qualified trader business rather than what is. So if you read Section 1202E3, it says a qualified trader business is any business other than a business in 20 listed fields, all of which are exactly what Bill has built over the last 20 years, right? So financial services, banking, brokerage services.
So if we talk about Congress's infinite wisdom, this is going to be a short conversation. So let me just jump to two things. First of all, the OBBBA, the One Big Beautiful Bill, increased the $10 million to $15 million and was very helpful in some other ways as well. But let me just ask, what are the mistakes one could make that could disqualify you from QSBS treatment?
Yeah, there are a variety of mistakes. As I say, I work with a lot of founders and venture capitalists. I think, the way QSBS works is there's kind of two you need to look at it from two sides. First, it's the investor side, right? In other words, I have to get shares. I have to purchase shares of domestic C corporation and hold those shares. I, as the owner of QSBS, can make lots of mistakes and lose my QSBS. Similarly, the company itself needs to meet various requirements. So, for example, one of the requirements is that the shareholder needs to have get those shares at original issuance. What that means is I need to buy the shares directly from the company in exchange for cash or for sweat equity or for the contribution of property. But in contrast, let's say Bill gets his shares at original issuance, and I go to Bill and I say, hey, Bill, I want to buy your shares. Now I'm holding those shares. Well, he wouldn't sell to me anyway. But let's just go with my hypothetical, just for illustrative purposes. I buy his shares. I don't get QSBS because I never got those shares at original issuance. Okay. Similarly, on the investor side, going back to your question about how do people mess up QSBS, we end up seeing often investors who get the QSBS. So I buy shares of QSBS, and then my estate planner says, hey, Christopher, you need to start thinking about estate planning. What we think you should do is take those shares and put them into a family limited partnership, right? Because that's going to reduce the tax and you can gift units of the LP, the flip. When I take those shares and transfer them into the partnership, I blow QSBS for all the shares. So that's on the investor side. You really have to be careful that you got shares of domestic C corporation, you have them. Or, for example, early employees. I get on the phone all day long, less and less now, but for a long time, I get on the phone with early employees at some very successful startups, and I'd say, so Christopher, I want you to do what you need to do to vet my shares of QSBS. I got them. I've held them for 5 years. We're going to have the exit. And I say, so, boy, that's great. So send me your stock certificate. And they say, oh, well, it's still an option. And if you hold options, you don't get QSBS. You have to buy the shares, right? This goes back to the original issuance.
So what I would say is this. I would say this is a tremendous benefit for people who are investors or early employees of technology businesses, high growth businesses. If you are in that situation, find somebody like Christopher, because there are, in Congress's infinite wisdom, there are a somewhat infinite number of ways that you can disqualify yourself. But if you know in advance what you're doing, this is a tremendous benefit that you can take advantage of.
Let me just add that,
Yeah.
right? And I just, to be clear, it's not that, what's interesting, that the success of QSBS here in Silicon Valley and in the startups in New York, in almost all the cases, most startups that they set up the Delaware C Corp here, they're writing code on their living room floor in the mission, right? And doing the stuff, and then they get VCs to come in. That business model grafts on very nicely to the QSBS rules. In other words, most of those situations, those founders, just by default of having to set up the C Corp to get the VCs, to issue options to their early employees, those folks are going to be just fine for QSBS.
Yep.
The edge cases, people who have an S corporation they think could be QSBS, or all sorts of partnership. We can talk about LLC conversions. There's lots of other situations. But as I say, I think most of the time there are lots of tripwires. But in the traditional startup model, I think you're less prone to make those errors.
It's a tremendous thing. If you are in the situation where you've got a high growth tech business, you're involved in the early stages, you absolutely owe it to yourself to learn more. We can help you with that as the first stage. And then if it looks like it's something that would apply to you, we would put you to someone like Christopher.